Welcome to this episode of Dialogues with Creators. This time around, I won't be interviewing anyone, but I will basically be monologuing about something very important to me, why I write fiction. I will be speaking on this at a civic meeting in the near future, and this is part of my preparation, and I thought, what a better subject to speak about than why I do this type of creativity. Stay tuned. First of all, I write fiction because it's something I can do well. Now, that might seem like a weird place to start, but if I am going to spend a huge chunk of my life devoted to something, and in this case, writing fiction, reading fiction, writing about fiction, reading about fiction, and studying fiction, I figure I should be halfway decent at it. However, it took me some time to believe that I was halfway decent at it. 10 books to be exact. Some so-called experts say that one has to write 1,000,000 words of fiction before they deserve or are ready to write a novel. So I achieved that a while back. It was in my 10th book where I got the real affirmation I needed, even though 5 of them were published by others. And being published by others, by other companies, in most cases, means that those people are willing to put up money to get it on the market. For some reason, that wasn't enough for me. It's usually enough for most people. The difference was that for the 10th book, I was recognized as a finalist for the Townsend Prize for Literary Fiction, which is awarded by the Atlanta Writers Club and the Georgia Writers Museum. It has a long history, and many important writers have won it. I did not win, but I was a finalist, and that means I got to spend an evening with rich Atlanta folks, not my normal group of people, but they were lovely and kind. Seriously, fiction is an art form. It is an art form like music, painting, dance, theater. As such, it is a form of expression. It is one that speaks most to me, while someone else may prefer to express their creativity by acting at a little theater in town, or getting into a band, or taking classes at a creative arts organization or guild. And they will do it without any reference to being noticed, making it to Broadway, or exhibited at the High Museum. They are doing it because the act in itself is enjoyable, it's human, it's part of the human condition, it's humane in that it is a type of kindness. It is a giving of a gift to give your expression to other people. It allows your emotions, feelings, and ideas to be expressed, and it's meaningful to us. I would like to say that there are other forms of art or expression I do well, but at best I'm mediocre at them. I don't inflict my singing on other people, just those poor folks who are unfortunate enough to sit next to me in church and have to hear it. I am loud. I draw and paint with and for my granddaughter, who too is not judgmental yet. I don't even dance as if nobody's watching, if you've ever heard that expression. It's a lovely expression, but I don't even do that. But what I do is write and tell stories. And I am drawn to that art form because, and this is my second reason, I love stories. Who doesn't? Why do you watch your favorite show on TV or rewatch your favorite movie on streaming? I always remember one time I was teaching humanities, and I asked the students, because we were studying drama in the Greek era, and the point was that they watched the same story over and over in different ways that the playwrights would put them together. And I asked them if they'd ever watched a movie over and over, and one student said that she had watched the movie Armageddon 14 times, which was an interesting discussion point. But we watch the same stories over, we watch the same kind of stories over and over again. Do we do this because we have nothing better to do? Probably not. No, we do it because we love stories. Stories are all around us. They're at the dinner table, they're in the pew, they're in the conference room, they're at the recreational park. But we have to realize stories are not just a series of events. That's a big problem that people have when they start to write fiction or even a memoir. It's not just a series of events. Stories are not the daily actions of life lined up one after the other. They are what we do with them to construct meaning out of them. They have people that matter, actions and events that move in a direction, and a resolution that means something. That something that it means could be a moral or a good feeling, or it could be personal pain, as in the catharsis that people have felt from watching tragedies and reading tragic stories. We don't just love stories, but we all also have stories and hold on to them. And that's because of my third reason. We don't just love stories, but stories matter. Stories are not fluff. Stories are the building blocks of life, of civic engagement, of relationships. Stories, I often used to tell my students in public speaking class, are the strongest materials of a public speaker. Telling stories well, however, is something we have to learn. We've all sat through someone telling a story who doesn't understand something. They don't understand that just because the occurrence was funny in the moment doesn't mean it's funny now. Or the person who thinks that every step of the story needs to be told the same way with the same emphasis and the same amount of time. And so they get really deep into the weeds, as we say. Or my favorite, the person doesn't understand that it doesn't help to stop and explain why Betty Lou in the story met her husband in college 20 years before on a blind date that was really embarrassing to everybody, even though this has nothing to do with the story they started to tell. There are lots of ways we can tell a story badly. A story is not just about something, although it is, but it's also about how it is about something. It's the telling that brings us in. There are lots of stories. Some are romance novels, some are soap operas, some are tragedies, some are even comedies, some are great masterpieces. There are lots of these stories of wives committing adultery, but few of them tell the story as well as Tolstoy did in Anna Karenina or in Madame Bovary, which was written by a French author who right now has escaped my mind. And you literary types can answer that one. I think it was Balzac, but I'm not sure. More specifically, though, why novels? Okay, for me, it's because short stories are short. Now, that's going to sound kind of goofy, but keeping a short story short is harder than you might think, especially when you start to fall in love with what's happening and the characters, and you realize there is backstory and there is this and there is possibilities of the story, and so maybe it does need to be expanded. It's especially hard when you start to think, but how did and why did and what happened later and who are these people anyway? I have written more short stories than I have novels, but my novels have gotten more recognition. There's a few reasons for that. One is my choice. I just have not put my short stories out there. Short stories demand a different method to publication. You can collect them in a let's say, a collection of short stories and self-publish them or have them published that way. But those, I don't know, I'm sure those do as well, marketing-wise, as one coherent novel story. You also can get them published through literary magazines or contests, and those take different methods of getting the attention to one's work. For example, you have to follow various literary magazines, you have to send them to certain ones, you have to be sure you're not sending them to too many, you have to be sure that you're not paying more money for the contest than it's worth, things like that. And so I've done that a few times, and my short stories tend to be very Twilight Zone-y. Not all of them, but some of them. Because I guess I feel a little constrained by not being able to develop a whole lot more in a short story. I also think that novels are the great American literary form, and they allow for depth and breadth and experimentation and the room to tell a big story with a lot of people. So far, I've given 3 reasons why I write fiction. Well, 4 reasons maybe. And now I'm going to kind of take a side trip for a minute and talk about the non-reasons. I don't write fiction because it's easier than poetry or plays or screenplays. I've tried those. I have done some of it, and each requires a different set of connections. For example, to write plays, you have to be connected to the theater world because somebody has to put the play on. And then when you have the play put on, there's a constant rewriting process going on. Screenplays, you need to have connections in the film world. I have a lot of stories on that. I'll spare you that, except I loved how one fellow thought I knew Tyler Perry for some reason, and I still don't know why he did, but he got in touch with me and insisted that I was going to get his screenplay to Tyler Perry. Poetry. I write it, but I don't make it public. And honestly, more people read novels than chapbooks of poetry. I'm sorry, they just do. However, I don't write fiction for obvious other reasons. I don't do it for money. That's a joke. That's a laugh. Or fame or legacy. Let's talk about this. I meet a lot of people who want to write a book and believe that they have a book in them. Maybe they do. I try not to discourage them, but I do have ways of feeling out what they're really talking about. Many times, they want the record of a story for their families, and that is a wonderful, wonderful motivation. Or they want to write about a certain incident that they feel was important. That can be very good too. They may very well have something that people want to read. But if you're going to do all the work of writing a book, because a book is long, it's 200, 300 pages in most cases, it's a lot of work, it's very difficult work, you want to be sure it's something people want to read. You also have to have a lot of material for a whole book, which means research. And you really want to write something that is going to get attention. Just because you write a book doesn't mean your descendants will read it. I'm sorry. Many people whom I know probably don't have the time or the interest to write a whole book. I encourage them to create oral history videos of themselves talking about their lives and make them short, do them episodically. They will have more fun with it. They will be more likely to be viewed, and they won't have to work hard at writing because, as I said, writing is miserably hard work. I also, with folks like this, feel them out to see if they think they're going to make money. Again, some people think they're going to take the publishing world by storm because lightning hits occasionally. I recently ran into this in my writers group. A person came and submitted work that was clearly generative artificial intelligence based. And there are lots of people on social media will say, oh, you can create books this way and put them on Amazon, make a fortune selling books this way. Or publishers will want them. Well, publishers do not want them. They will not even think about it. They don't even want covers or trailers or anything that used generative AI. We tried to be kind, but we had to deal with the ethical problems this person was experiencing because of the use of AI. And my views on AI will be discussed in the next solo podcast, and it's been done by one already. I don't want to discourage people. I just want them to understand that thinking their idea for a novel is going to make them the next J.K. Rowling is like thinking you're going to win the Masters tournament because one time you were lucky enough to shoot par. It's possible, but it's going to take an awful lot of work, commitment, and time. Finally, I write fiction because it matters. So let's step back a little bit. We learned early in life that fiction is stories that are not true. We also learned that there are all kinds of fiction. There's realistic fiction, historical fiction, like Gone with the Wind, magical realism, which is a generally realistic story, but there is one character or one aspect of the story that is magical, and it's just accepted as part of the story. Then there's genre fiction, which is like detective or romance or erotica or westerns, which often is looked down on, the genre fiction is, but there are rules to it, and there's usually more money in it. Then there's literary fiction, which is usually described as more character-based, more trying to write about the human condition, explore that. It's also written at a higher level of more poetic language, more descriptive language. There are fairy tales, fantasy, science fiction. Those are other types of fiction. Well, as far as the stories that are not true statement, okay, there's true, and then there's true. Famously, fiction has been called, quote, the lie that tells the truth, end quote. Or more specifically, quote, fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth, end quote. The first version of that, the lie that tells the truth, is supposedly or apparently from Albert Camus, the existential French Algerian writer, whom I'm going to do a program on in a while. Although I've also found it attributed to Neil Gaiman, who is a science fiction writer. At least that's what I'm going to call him. I'm sure other people would have another genre or type for him. I would have to say, at least in his case, it is the lie that tells the writer's truth. We get to read it and decide if we are persuaded by the writing to the writer's version of truth, or if we learn anything from it. But it's not just coming out directly and telling the truth. It is telling the truth in a narrative of human experience. In his famous novel, The Stranger, which also goes by the name The Outsider, or, here's my bad French, L'Étranger, Albert Camus, and for those who are looking for this, it's C-A-M-U-S, tells us life is meaningless in a very intriguing and entertaining way through a murder story. However, Fyodor Dostoevsky also tells a story of a murder, but he tells us that life has meaning if God, in all his mysteries, is at the center of it. And this is in The Brothers Karamazov. One of those books is very long, the second one. The other is relatively short. You could probably read it in a few hours in one setting. They're both amazing. They're both translations, so you can get various translations to see how they compare, one from French, of course, and one from Russian. But both those books, which I recently read The Stranger, and the first time I read it years and years ago, I was sort of perplexed, and now I was just totally taken into it. And the character and his apathy about what's going on with him. To bring it to where people are more likely to know, Agatha Christie tells us that reason and attention to detail and perseverance can bring killers to justice. But she also says that after that happens, life goes back to normal and we shouldn't be too worried about it. Romance novels tell us that love will come at the end, no matter how difficult the ups and downs of the relationship seems. Now, I have to say, to be honest, I think that's what romance novels tell us. I don't read them. Now, are all these statements true? You get to decide if those are true while you read, and afterward, if the story is good enough to stay with you, you'll keep thinking about it and still be contemplating what they were trying to say. Did they say it? Did they make the case? Was it interesting? Was it compelling? Unfortunately, most don't. Although you may read those 4 examples I just gave of romance novels, Agatha Christie, Brothers Karamazov, and The Stranger, and come to a totally different idea of what the author's truth is and not be wrong. But it all comes down to this for me. Stories change the world. Stories tell the truth, some better than others. Fiction is not untrue. It simply tells the truth a less direct way, and in a way that engages you in the human condition and the human experience. Anthony Grooms, a Georgia writer whom I've met, and is a former teacher of writing, stated, and I quote, "As writers, we must continue to write the books, poems, plays, and films that dig into the real truth of history, no matter how gritty. To do so is not just an act of resistance, but it is a moral calling of our art." And I like that. I'll put my own words in there. He continues, "I am not calling us to write propaganda or to take a particular political stance. I encourage us to research and to write truthfully with emotional depth. To do so, especially in an atmosphere of censorship, is a courageous political act. But writing, like it or not, no matter how you approach it, is always a political act." End quote. Now, I like his quote. I think it's an important quote, but I'm going to have a few comments with it. I would agree with him if we change the words partisan for political. Yes, it is political in that it is relevant to the body politic, to our civil society, to our living together as humans. Yes. But there is a difference between political, it being part of who we are as a society, and partisan being this party, this position, this part of the party, etc. Okay. He also says, especially in an atmosphere of censorship. And to be honest, although he might not think that certain areas are censorship, I would say that the possibility of censorship is always there. Especially if you're looking at publishing. Now, I'm not saying that if a publisher does not publish you that it's censorship. That's nonsense. Of course it's not. But publishers want certain things, and you should be sure of what they publish before you try to approach them. They may not be interested in the kind of thing you want to read. And then, of course, there's some things that folks will write that will be canceled, if you will, or considered very, not acceptable in a certain time. I think of one writer, Orson Scott Card, who wrote the Ender's Game, and he was way popular with science fiction. It's a very interesting book, and it was made into a movie and everything, but he had a very staunch position against LGBT things and issues, and he's kind of out of out of public eye as much now. Because he was, he had his sayings about those things. We've seen the same thing with J.K. Rowling, because she's been so against transgenderism. And in both cases, they had already made enough money, they're probably okay. But it goes to show that even though they had written other things in other genres, that somehow their political stances got sucked into that. And such is unfortunately, the climate that we are in. However, I will also quote a writer from the Dominican Republic, Julia Alvarez, who wrote In the Time of the Butterflies, which I love that book. And she wrote about the oppression her people lived under during Rafael Trujillo's dictatorship, and what it was like. And it was a very moving book, and it's about the death of the Mirabal sisters. And you can read the book and enjoy it, or just look them up on Wikipedia. Although she writes based on historical fact, she did a great deal of research. She says, quote, "A novel is not, after all, a historical document." Okay. And end quote for a second. It's important to remember that. Okay. And that does not give the historical novelist leeway to rewrite history. Okay. That's not now. Some write alternate histories now, but they need to do their research. Excuse me. But let me finish her quote. Quote, "But it is a way to travel through the human heart." Like I said, it's not just what a story is about, but how it is about it. Two authors can tell the same basic storyline very differently. In writing fiction, we pledge allegiance to a good story that tells the truth about the human condition, rather than telling the truth and then making up a story for it. Excuse me. So, what is the truth I tell? You can read my books and find out. So let me introduce you to some of them. First of all, I have a series of mysteries. They're set in a small town in Georgia, and they focus. The main character is the editor of the county's newspaper. I call them the long lost family, which is about a wedding that sort of goes wrong and ends up very dark, and family secrets come out, and the family sort of is pretentious and falls apart. The second one is Long Lost Justice, which I think is very good, but has gotten not much attention. Is about a young woman who is found dead on her family's property on the 4th of July, and they're not sure how this happened. And so that's unraveling that, but also it's more about how her death as a young 18-year-old, bright, going off to college young woman in an Hispanic family is how that affects her family and the community. And the last one is Long Lost Justice, which is the most historical one because it starts in 1959 and is about a hate crime, the burning of an African American church that is never solved because the town more or less doesn't want it to be. And the the editor of the paper doesn't solve them. He just gets involved with the police, um, gets information for them and from them at times, but they're they're not so much procedurals. They're how it works, all works out in the community. Now, these are not cozies, which is a term I hate. I think the worst and best example of a cozy is Father Brown shows that are on BritBox or BBC or PBS. And I watch them, it's kind of a family thing we do. But on cozies, there's a small town, usually. Miss Marple is an example, where someone is murdered, and after it's over, everything goes back to normal. The person who died wasn't so important, and maybe they were someone who, to quote the old Western, needed killing. After it's solved and the killer is arrested, everyone's happy, and there's usually some kind of frivolous joke at the end. I can't tell you how much I hate those things. I cringe at them, especially Father Brown. And the other reason, the Father Browns, well, there's several reasons, but they drive me crazy, is that J.K. Chesterton, who wrote the original Father Browns, would not recognize this Father Brown. And J.K. Chesterton is rolling over in his grave every time this TV show comes on. And secondly, they're not true to life. I mean, Father Brown is the most liberal Catholic priest in the early 1950s. He would have been defrocked many years ago for all the stuff he does. So it's just ridiculous. And this is often written about on the internet of how non truthful these are. Grant Chester is another version of that. So I try to stick more to real life, and mine are about how a community or a family is affected long term by a murder or a death. Then I have one Southern chick lit historical fiction where it's about Virginia Foster, who's an empty nester who believes her town of Abundance, South Carolina, can break out of its post-NAFTA doldrums that affected the fabric or the textile industry by starting the first annual Biscuit Festival. Now that sounds like a silly setup, but it's just the surface level story, and it includes some laughter and intrigue. But the real story is that of her mother's family, the Clelands, which might border on Southern Gothic. Her family has owned a big part of the town forever, but has its own secrets that Virginia has never learned or even knew existed until the festival means she has to. The story's theme is about knowing the truth about one's family frees us from having to keep up pretensions. At the end, Virginia learns to become a person in the town instead of the person who thinks she runs the town. I have one family contemporary story. In its theme is reconciliation and growth are possible but painful. And that one is about a young man whose mother wants him to take care of her adopted child, and she does not want to, and he does not want to. So that's called Sudden Future. And the other one I talked about was Bringing Abundance Back. And I call Bringing Abundance Back the blue one because the cover's blue, and Sudden Future the white one because the cover is white and has birds on it. Then my most recent is Appalachian historical fiction about a woman who has to survive the flu pandemic in 1918 in the far reaches of Appalachia, Dickinson County, Virginia, and taking care of 4 orphans whose mother and father have both died, and the whole world has shut down. And she has a disfiguring condition, and she makes her living going from home to take care of women who just had babies. So it's called Lying in reference to that. And I'm very proud of this one. It's based on my roots, and I will be writing another one based on it next. I hope to go to the Heinemann Settlement School and do some writing there. The next one that will be published is called The Faux Ark River Tanning and Hair Salon and Bake Shop. Yeah, and it's a satire on reality television. And it's like with Bringing Abundance Back, it seems to have a frivolous or silly surface level story, but the characters are all hiding from something. And so the truth I'm trying to show is that hiding from one's life is futile. So if after that, after those two that are about to be published or I'm starting to write on, but the second one, the Appalachian one, requires a great deal of research into the coal mining industry. After that, if God allows, there will be more Long Lost and probably about 6 other books. But honestly, the truth comes from the story. It has to come from the story, not from any tacked on message. And the story comes from a seed or collections of seeds that grow organically in my life and brain. Thank you for your time. It's a joy to be able to visit with you this way. And I hope that you can contact me through my website and we can talk more. I like to help people who want to write, but I also am pretty realistic about it. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.